So I'm going to talk about a topic that is very closely related to me. It's impregnated with a lot of subjectivity, let's say. So I also have tried to take a step back and think about it as a researcher. So do not be surprised if during my presentation both of the objectiveness and the subjectiveness are mixing themselves. And it's also one of the basic premises of feminism, right? The personal is political and the political is personal. So I'm here to talk today about our gender identity. How are we perceived digitally online regarding specifically search engines. I see there's a lot of varied people in the room, so if anybody has a question, and I'm going too fast, because there's a lot of techie people, I see some lawyers in the room, so if I'm going too fast, just raise your hand and I will gladly explain a concept or just slow down a little bit. So just please feel free to do so. I think this is the environment where we are exactly supposed to do so. So if you Google me, you will find me naked. And this is across the UK, Mexico, Peru, or each Google is geolocated to different countries. So I have struggled with this issue for quite some while now, because I am a human rights lawyer, I am a researcher, I am a journalist, and no matter what I do, I protested topless 6 years ago when I joined Femin. I was studying international human rights in Paris. I joined Femin. Femin is an international feminist collective that uses the naked body as a canvas against dictatorships and patriarchy and religion. So this is me naked. You can find it online anyways. I was actually struggling with myself on whether if I should put this up or not, because I see these images and I cannot identify myself with them anymore. So is this me? Or is this only me? Is that part of myself? Is my Facebook profile myself? Or is my Instagram profile myself as well? But wait, at least in Instagram and Facebook, I can post my own shit. Here, it's Google deciding it for me. I only decided. Yeah, that's me naked. Every time I see it, it's like, yeah, that's me naked. I hate those pictures. I hate them. So let's think about this, because nudity is essentially, you get naked, it's very intimate. You get naked when you go to shower. Sometimes I sleep naked when it's very hot outside. And you get naked when you're going to have sex with somebody. And can anybody else think of any other situation? I still want to think, I'm still thinking, why? How on earth did you think that protesting topless was a good idea? Well, in my defense, 6 years ago, I didn't really know that I was going to be forever naked online. I didn't even really have that consciousness. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. Of course not. I only consented to be ephemerally naked in a determinate public space that is the street. So a lot of people tell me, oh no, now you're screwed. If you're naked publicly, you're going to be forever publicly naked. But I think that this is a fallacy. Is Google really public? Because then how do you define public, right? You can define public because it comes from the state, a public servant, a public archive, right? You can define publicity in terms of economy that is non-rival goods. It means, I don't know the exact English translation, but basically like security. Public goods, goods that are not, no matter how much people have those goods, they are not related to scarcity. And we also can define the public with, if we throw in a little bit of philosophy and name dropping, what Habermas identifies as the public sphere, which is a sphere where we engage in debate and discussion outside of the state itself. So, wait, again, Google is a private enterprise that operates with secret, opaque algorithms and is making decisions over my body. So, it's also very dangerous to concede that Google is public, because then we would be conceding that Google is the owner of the public archives. Are we ready to make that concession? I'm definitely not. So their algorithms decide what is relevant and in what order. And this is not minor, because search engines do impact on how people perceive us. And I will get to that later on when I start speaking about identity. So my essential question when I started my research, it then had nothing to do with me being naked. I was just angry because I wanted those pictures down. But when I started my research, I was thinking, am I what Google says I am? What is identity when we are changing all the time? And how are we going to fight back against private companies deciding who we are online? I'm sorry, but we are all data. Everything we do, everything, I mean, I think this whole exposition is about that, right? And nowadays, this Privacy International has a concept that I really like, that is the digital doppelganger. Every single digital trace, every like, every single thing we Google, every email that is traced, it's a digital us, a parallel Gisela that is just surfacing and living in the digital environment. I want to have control over that, naked or not, but specifically even more so naked. So I'm going to go very quickly because I think it's a bit of an overstated topic and it's over-discussed for me, but maybe everybody in the public is not necessarily up to date with these discussions. So I'm going to talk first about how search algorithms work very quickly so you can see my point on how opaque and arbitrary they are. And of course the biases that they have as well. And I will talk about the famous right to be forgotten. So then we can delve into identity, a little bit of bodily identity. I read way too much on this, and it's just really complicated, but I just want to like brush through it. So then we can finish talking about gender and consent and how can this be applied to our digital selves. That's the essential question. How can gender and consent be applied to our digital selves vis-a-vis the private enterprises that control our online life? So let's talk first about delisting. I don't like to call it the right to be forgotten because it's misleading. And as Julia Powell said, it has really strong PR campaign on, behind that leads us to think inaccurate things. So I try to figure out, I spent a month trying to figure out how search engine algorithms work, but guess what? They are secret and protected by intellectual property, so you cannot. So everything I know, I got it from this little Google video, which I freely edited. It should be on Creative Commons, but it's not, so whatever. Wait, where's Mr. Matt again? There it is. So we're gonna get a geek, Mr. Matt, the expert guy, that is going to explain us how the index work. This is the first important concept, indexing. So basically, Google has these spiders, which are, think about it as a software, it's part of the Google algorithm, that crawl the internet and start fetching a web page and making the link of those web pages with other web pages that they in turn point to, and so on until they have mapped the entire internet, making a sort of web. It looks like a network. It's the essential principle of a network. So all of this, Google stores it in a copy of its database that it's precisely the index. This is very important because when we search for something in Google, we're not searching the entire internet. We're just searching Google's index of the internet. So think of it just as Google's copy of the internet. The copy is not exactly exact. So then indexing is kind of like the back of a book. So the index of a book. So when you want to look for something within the book, you go to the index and it points you to the right page, right? But the problem is that online, when you look for something, you're going to have millions of results. So, I got this again. Hold on. That's the problem with videos. So then the next concept comes with prioritizing. How does Google know which results are the most relevant ones? Because as I was saying, it's just thousands and thousands of web pages. So the first thing that Google does is actually search for the, roughly speaking, because obviously I don't even know how the code works. It's not even disclosed. So the first thing that Google does is check for the words. And then once it's checking for the words, it's going to look for the relevance of the pages. The relevance is determined of how reputable a source is. So it's not the same if I open a random blog than the New York Times or CNN. The New York Times or CNN are obviously going to pop out first. And then, it's not only necessarily that, but there's also, this was a PageRank algorithm that the founders of Google patented back in 1994. It's very roughly speaking how it works. But what I'm trying to say is that there's also a programming bias and a cultural bias into this algorithm. So they look for words. Then they try to determine which of these words are relevant. They cross information, try to determine which of these are relevant. And to sort out the relevance, they say, oh, the New York Times of the world are more relevant than the random blogs that are out there. So if more people point to your web page, you're going to be more relevant in Google's algorithm. And then if the relevant people point to your web page, you're going to be bumped up in Google's algorithm. That was the original one. Now, Google's engineers make over 500 changes a year that, of course, we don't know what they are about. They have introduced new features, kind of like Wikipedia always goes on top, right? Now there's this truth boxes. So that you just, how many calories does a glass of wine have? You don't even have to click. They just point it at you. It's a truth box that says 87 calories. You know, I've looked at that a couple of times. And then you have this, if you're looking for Justin Bieber, you're going to have to your right a special column that says all the biographical info of Justin Bieber. So how do we really know that these algorithms are being correct or not? So the question that I was asking myself is it the most programmers nowadays are white male engineers living in the United States? And these algorithms are not neutral. Because when you program them, you are inputting your bias into the own algorithms. So is it the thinking of these white male Google engineers that makes my top list results be on top? A. And B, there's also cultural bias because this algorithm has it works as a sort of with artificial intelligence as well. What does this mean? That it learns from what the crowd is clicking. And the results that are clicked the most get bumped up as well. And that's what makes Google such a good search engine, right? I've tried using DuckDuckGo, which is a more private and doesn't trace you, and it's not as evil, even though Google says they are not evil. Maybe they're not, who am I to say? But it's true that the personalized results of Google do give you a better user experience, but that comes with a privacy cost, and it also comes with this other side of questioning how they index and how they prioritize. So my initial questions were two. What happens if Google doesn't index something? What happens with that information? A, we wouldn't even know they didn't index it. It would fall into what people call the dark web. Let's put that aside. And then secondly, how do they know, how am I supposed to know how they are prioritizing information? And how are we going to question programming and cultural biases? Because then this could explain it, although I have no clue. The cultural bias could explain it. People are always going to want to click on tits. Nobody wants to read my 20-page dissertation on the right to be forgotten in Google. People want to see my boobs, right? Is that always going to come on top? And how democratic is that? Democracy is not the majority. Democracy is protecting minorities. And in this case, I am a minority because I am dissenting towards an established status quo that keeps women being covered. I will get more into that when we speak about gender. So let's go very quickly through the falsely called right to be forgotten. So this man named Mr. Costeja, Mario Costeja, he's Spanish, and in 2010 he sued Google because when somebody Googled him, look at that, it's even a verb now. When somebody put his name in a determinate private search engine, one of the first results that popped was two announces in a Spanish newspaper, two ads, because he hadn't, selling his furniture because he hadn't paid Social Security debts. These ads were from 1996. The poor man had already paid his debts. It was so many years later. This is 2010. And then he was asking Google, why are you still displaying these ads? It was not even a journalistic piece. They were ads. Look at that. There's ads. Because I didn't pay 16 years ago. This information is no longer relevant and it's causing harm to myself and my reputation. So it eventually went up to the European Court of Human Rights. And what the court said is that yes, Google had to delist and I will go to that in a bit. Google had to delist Mr. Costeja's name, even if the search results were legal, when the information, because the information could be outdated, inadequate, inaccurate, irrelevant, or devoid of purpose with no public interest, roughly speaking. There was a lot of debate about this. What does delinking really mean? So I was telling you earlier that when somebody looked for Mario Costeja, the Google's algorithm, what does is that it links it to the web page. So then those web pages pop up, right? There's a link between one and the other. So just delinking means when Mario Costeja is typed, do not show this certain web page. There was a lot of debate because a lot of people, with reason, were saying this was going to be used for censorship. There's already a case in Mexico of a corrupt man that engaged in a fraud with the ex-president that wanted his results delisted from Google. And you know what's the worst part? That the Mexican authorities said he was right and he had the right to be delisted. I call it delinking. It's not forgotten from anywhere. It's still on Google's index. It's just being delinked. So if I look Mario Costeja's old deaths, the results are going to pop up. You know, is everybody following me right now? Because this is kind of a murky topic. It took me quite a while just to get my head around it. So it's not really censorship because it's still on the index. It's just delinking. When Mario Costeja comes in, I delink it. But if I want to look for anything else, then we could. So I was thinking, I want to use this. Gisela Perez De Acha. Just delink the results where I'm naked. But wait. This resolution doesn't include the retrieval of consent. I do not consent anymore to my naked body being online. I never consented to be topless on Google. Just on the streets for an ephemeral period. Now Google is taking it out of context. If it's a newspaper, there's a timely context to that picture with an article. Now you're just seeing isolated pictures that might as well be yesterday. So in a way, the past becomes an eternal present. How are we going to approach and think about that? So as I was telling you, this is an actual meme. I didn't make it myself. People were freaking out because of this, because of all the censorship that entailed, and they are right in a way. So what I was explaining you is exactly this. If my name is linked through all these three, you can't really see them, sorry about that. Didn't pick the right color, but my name is linked to naked protest, nipple images, and newspapers.com, just to say something. So if you delink them, you just not show those results. But if you look Gisela Perez De Acha topless, then they will pop up again. So let's speak briefly now about the right to identity. Any questions up to here now? Before going into identity, I would like to explore a concept about this philosopher, Noah Harari, that is called dataism. It's the faith on algorithms. How many of you use Waze? I live in Mexico City, so it's super crazy. If I don't use Waze, I will die. I know people don't drive usually here in London, but in Mexico City, our subway service is not that good. So I'm driving, and then Waze tells me, turn right. I know my house is on the left, but I'm trained to think, no, Waze must be right, and I am wrong. I'm gonna turn right, and guess what? Algorithms make mistakes. Why are we assuming that this technology is A, neutral? It's not, I already explained to you, and B, why are we assuming it's 100% correct all the time? Can these algorithms make mistakes? Why were poor Spanish guys' depths featured so prominently? That discussion is being right now obscured by the censorship debate, which is also a thing. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just trying to see nuances over here. So, identity. As I was telling you, what is identity when we're constantly changing all the time? I am not the one I was 6 years ago. I'm not the one that woke up this morning. I'm already a different person after coffee and breakfast, I can assure you that. So how do we define identity? And the most important thing for me as a human rights lawyer, how are we going to use identity so we can actually practice it against companies? So after a lot of research, I came up with a very simple definition of identity. Identity is linked to dignity and is linked to autonomy. And I understand dignity as the capacity of being able to make a basic definition against pain and pro-pleasure. So if you are a being that can feel pain and suffering and decide against that, you have dignity and you're autonomous. In my conception of dignity, of course a lot of people do not think that way, but that's my conception of dignity. It's open for debate. It constitutes our existence as self-reflexive beings, as someone, and not only as something. So, who am I? Who are we? Am I my data? Am I my data managed by private enterprises? And often when I make myself this question after protesting topless, I often think that the first reference of my identity is my body. I mean, first, okay, my name, right? My name doesn't change. My name stays static. Other people talk about me, refer about me like that. But for me, my body, my physical body, it's the first thing I wake up and the thing that I have to deal with all my life. There's a Mumford & Sons song that says, in these bodies we will live, in these bodies we will die. No matter what you do, it's your body. And then, identity, what is the difference between identity and privacy? Because the badly called right to be forgotten has been approached as privacy. It's a privacy, first it's data protection because it was about data, right? Because that's how Mario Costeja sued. So if you sue with data, you're gonna get a data response. But then people try to think about it as privacies. And I also think this approach is off. Why? Because privacy means not letting something intimate get out into the public. Identity means managing things that are already out in the public. Because identity also has an important social component. We are what people perceive we are. And that's where search engines also come into consideration. I mean, I bet Tactical Tech Googled me before inviting me to talk here. It's become now a reference of a public curriculum. It's kind of like a LinkedIn. Well, so why can't I manage that? Why do I have to deal with my naked body forever when I never said yes to that? So just very quickly, because this is a boring lawyer thing, but I had to throw it in, sorry. In Latin America, it's very interesting because the right to identity has been officially recognized in a way that hasn't in the US or here in Europe, because here in Europe, it's usually linked with privacy. And in Latin America, it's because of the forced disappearance of children during the military conflicts in Central America and the dictatorships on the southern corn, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay. The Inter-American Court has recognized identity as the attributes and characteristics that allow for our individualization in society. It's very broad, but I think it's a very interesting advance that as lawyers we can take to start putting it forward against these Silicon Valley companies. So, as I was saying, it's not privacy, it's taking control of information that is already public. And it has to do with autonomous self-realization and freedom. As I was saying again, dignity and self-determination. It's what separates me from a plant. It's what separates, I'm a vegetarian as well, it's what separates an animal from a chair. That they are autonomous, that they can decide against pleasure, against pain and, yeah, you know what I mean. And also, the right to be different from oneself. That's also identity. I have the right to change my mind, especially when I'm talking about my body. So let's go back to the original question now that I gave you all this framework. If a woman decides to be publicly naked once, does she mean she give her consent to be forever portrayed like that online? let's have a conversation about consent. And for that, I have a great video I want to show you. It's one of my favorites.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you can make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware that they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important bit, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you're entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say, "No thank you," then don't make them tea. At all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea, don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes please, that's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind, and you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they are unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea, and they can't answer the question, "Do you want tea?" because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea, and they said yes, but in the time it took you to boil the kettle or brew the tea and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down, make sure the unconscious person is safe, and this is the important part again, don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they are safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it, going, "But you wanted tea last week," or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, "But you wanted tea last night." If you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you are able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to make myself a cup of tea.
Wonderful, no? I love it. I always teach it on my gender classes. Okay, so all the conversations about consent, not all of them, but let's say lately, the conversations about consent in feminism revolve around sexuality, as you just saw, and they revolve about choice. Being able to choose the fate of my own body with sexual and reproductive rights is a century-long struggle. Abortion, for example, right? Is the state supposed to legislate against my own choices of my own body when the fetus before 24 weeks does not have the ability to feel pleasure or pain, therefore doesn't have dignity, doesn't have autonomy? You see where I'm going? So this is actually a really, really big discussion. One of the problems that I have with this research, and I want to say it openly in case you can help me think about it, is that when I make the equivalent of consent and sexuality to use it against search engines to take my naked pictures down, then I am implicitly saying that being naked is always erotic. Do you see where I'm going, or did I lose you there again? Okay, question. Is female naked nudity always a sexual thing? Is female nudity always erotic? This is also a really, really long debate. So for that, let's go to Femin again. I love this picture. Why? Facebook censors female nipples, and it doesn't censor male nipples. Why? Because female nipples are attached to a biological reproductive function. So it's built by a patriarchy, which means this unequal status quo against women, as erotic. Reproduction and sex are tied together. Therefore, if your boobs are supposed to only give milk to my children, then they are always erotic. Therefore, they have to be covered. If male nipples don't have that adscription, then they are not always erotic. So Facebook takes down this, but it keeps this. It's the same nipple. The only thing that changes, it's gender, of course, but with gender, symbols and power that is ascribed onto them, because our nipples have this reproductive function. There is a feminist that wrote a really good paper in the 90s talking about the erotic dissidence. So all the sexual conducts that are accepted as right are the sexual expressions that fall into heterosexual, monogamous, and reproductive schemes. Anything else outside of that is being censored, prosecuted. Think about polygamy, think about gay marriage, think about all of these fights that we've been struggling that is outside of this, which is essentially patriarchy. So this, Gail Rubin calls them the erotic dissidents. And I really like it because it doesn't matter if my nudity is sexual or not. It will be considered sexual by the rest of people. And I've struggled a lot with that because when I was protesting topless, I really thought that by just frowning my eyebrows, I would desexualize and de-erotize my body. Because you know what? I did with myself. But the fact that I did it with my own self doesn't mean that the rest of society is going to perceive it that way. Because identity also has a social component. So that's why I really like the concept of erotic dissidents and how they have been persecuted, even in the internet nowadays. Up to the point that Facebook allows breastfeeding, but it doesn't allow feminine there. It doesn't allow my naked body on Facebook, which is also paradoxical because when I am a subject and I post a naked picture of myself on Facebook, it's going to be taken down. And when I am treated as an object, somebody else is deciding nudity for me, I cannot take it down on Google. So that's also a double standard that we're dealing with Silicon Valley. So we are at the same time stimulated to expose ourselves because it adds value to our bodies in a sexist society, and this is especially bad for teenage girls nowadays with Instagram and all the overexposure, then being judged for exposing too much or not complying by their own rules. Or following to networks of anger and harassment because you're showing a little bit of butt or a little bit of cleavage on Twitter. Then wanting to show our bodies as a sign of liberation. I grew up as in a very conservative Catholic family. So for me, nakedness and sexuality was a way of empowering myself. But for a lot of people, I go to a French beach. Everybody's topless, nobody cares. It's not an act of disruption, but for me it was, and I had to work with it. And then go around being punished for being free, for being naked, and then the cycle goes on and on and on and on. So to conclude, we are all data. I really like this book by John Cheney, We Are Data. Our digital selves and our physical selves are not separated nowadays. Think about it as cyborgs, or however you want a metaphor you want to put it. The right to be forgotten does not include consent. But let's just stand 1 minute and think about this. This is essentially what the video said. I hope you got it. I think it's very, very clear, and I encourage you to use it. Look for it, Tea and Consent on YouTube. It's active. You have to explicitly say yes. If you're, I don't know if I want tea, then you don't really want tea. Did I explicitly consent to be portrayed in Google like that? No. Based on equal power. Do not force tea into someone, right? Are we equals? Vis-a-vis Google? I am a Mexican lawyer. They are a multi-million-dollar company that profits on our privacy. Do you think we're equal? A choice. Feel free to say yes or no without pressure. So the Facebook's argument is, oh, if you don't like the Facebook rule, just get out. Just don't use Facebook anymore. I don't like that argument. I will not discuss it right now, because I also want to take some questions from you guys. But do you really have a choice at all on Google? Can you say, oh, let me just stop using your search engine and then you will not index anything about me? That's not going to work. How on earth is that going to work? So I don't even have any type of choice or an opt-out mechanism for the display of my naked body in this private platform, which algorithms, we have no idea how they work. And then it's also a process, because if you wanted tea, and now, I don't want tea, or the tea you served me, it's actually not that good, maybe I don't want it anymore. Or if you wanted tea yesterday, doesn't mean that you want tea the rest of the month, right? We saw it. So if I consented, again, to be ephemerally naked on the streets and on newspapers, does that mean I'm going to be chastised by being naked forever online? And I mean chastised not by me, by society, by all my potential partners that Google me, all the potential job offers that Google me. When I come into meetings as a serious lawyer, and the first thing I see is a bunch of 10 lawyer men with my picture on their phones. I didn't know the backlash this was going to have. I did it, I was young. I wouldn't do it again. So let's also think about the chilling effect that the erotic dissidents are having online because of this new perpetual memory. We're constantly, with these schemes, we're pushing them to express only heterosexual, monogamic, and reproductive forms of sexuality. And also, even though it's problematic to concede that all nudity is necessarily erotic, sexuality, consent, and violence, and identity are all relational concepts. This means it's not clear. When is it okay to hit your partner during sex? When it's violent? When are we talking about violence? And when are we just talking about, hey, we're being a little rough? This is a really, really gray area. So what I'm actually asking and bringing this discussion forward today in the classroom is, how are we going to take this debate and apply it to our digital selves and think about our digital selves? So again, identity vis-a-vis our gender, our naked digital selves, our genderized digital selves, has to do with taking control with what's already public, quote, quote, because I already went into the problems of recognizing these platforms as public. And essentially, it comes back to, I shouldn't be saying this, women are autonomous human beings. We have dignity, and we have rights over our own bodies. Just a little disclaimer, of course I'm not saying this consent theory should extend to anything, because then we will have the corrupt Latin American public servants saying, oh, you know what, I withdraw my consent from being a fraud, from being corrupt. I withdraw my consent, please delist this, Google, take it down. No, it's a very specific case about female nudity. There's a case in Argentina about a former Playboy girl that is now a 50-year-old mom. And her kids get trolled at school because she was, when she was 20, 30 years old, she was on the cover of Playboy magazine, but she was in a magazine, on a printed magazine with a certain context at a certain time, but now she's forever portrayed in this perpetual present as naked, when she wants to leave that behind. She's a professionist now. She was paying for her studies while posing and modeling, which also has to do with inequality itself. Jorge Luis Borges, the Argentinian writer, has this beautiful tale called Funes de Memorias, where Funes had a perfect memory. And poor Funes, it was a torture for him. He was in a dark room with absolutely no interactions, because he remembered every second of every single day. It was torture. Nietzsche says that the ability to forget is what makes us essentially happy. So I'm just wondering, how much of human memory should we be fighting to preserve, and why? So, I'm sorry, I am not what Google says I am, and I do vouch. for taking my pictures off of that private, obscure search engine. Thank you very much.
So it is time for questions, of course. I warned you at the beginning. So it would be nice to see some hands up. We still have time. It was a great talk. Oh, I'm running. You second, you first.
Thank you. Well, I want to congratulate the glass room because this has really been very, very interesting, this issue. Regarding what you just said about forgetting the past, what would you say if I ask you a question like transforming the past? So that means accepting our past and then transform it into something positive.
That's a beautiful question, and that's partly why I put my naked pictures here. I better own them, right? I better make theory or something about them. I'm going to be naked forever at this pace. But another note, I think a technical answer to that, a more tech-oriented answer to that, could be deprioritizing. So instead of removing from the index, just Google, don't show it on page 1. Take it to page 7. So if somebody's really interested in stalking me, they can still find it, but it's not my first public profile. And prioritization is important because 97% of the clicks go to the first 3 results. Come on, how many times do we go past page 1? When you really want to stalk someone or when you're really delving deep into some issue, right? So that's, I don't know if that quite answers your question. I think there's many ways to answer it, but that's like one of the technical solutions that are open now in the debate. And thank you very much. It's a beautiful question, abstract and full of reflections.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to ask how far you got working with Google to get your pictures removed.
I'm just trolling them for now. But let me just very quickly say that Google has implemented a mechanism to delist or forget, but they're not forgetting, remember that, delist revenge porn images. So if you were a victim of revenge porn, Google will delist it, but it doesn't, it applies to, okay, I hate the term revenge porn. Why? Because revenge for what? For dumping your boyfriend? Like, what, don't, and then pornography, I'm sorry, pornography is a consensual contract within an industrial frame to make third parties horny. So that was non-consensual. It's non-consensual dissemination of intimate images. That's how we call it. I know it's longer, and revenge porn is just more of a hit. So it doesn't, it applies to non-consensual dissemination of intimate images, but it doesn't quite apply to the withdrawal of consent. So, and I could also be considered as a public figure. So I am not sure if Google would be willing to take those pictures down because they consider it relevant for public debate. To which I say, okay, just leave one up, that's okay. I was protesting against the Mexican government, but why all of that, you know?
It's a very interesting issue because I contribute to news programs and various other things. Is that who I really am? So a lot of data about me is out there. Does that actually reflect on how I am? So almost I take your case but extend it beyond, if you like, the nudity of those pictures. They're pictures that somebody else took, that somebody else has posted online, that have an impact on you and your existence and how you are perceived by other people. And it's the intellectual property rights of the data and who owns it. And it's just very, very interesting. Could talk about it all day.
I know, we can if you want. Thank you very much. Do we have anybody else? I don't think so.
I'm sure we do. You just give a second. Yes.
I want to like, can I run away now?
I'm sorry.
No, don't worry. I was totally kidding. Go for it.
What do you think about harassment on, social media?
That's a very interesting question as well. I could give a talk only about this, but let me make it very short. So basically, gender is, and I should throw that in, I will think about it for next time. Gender is what is deemed appropriate by society because we were born with a penis or a vagina. What is deemed appropriate in terms of clothing, colors, topics of conversations, professions. So if you're born with a penis, the appropriate color for you is blue, you're going to play with Legos. And if you're born with a vagina, the appropriate color is going to be pink, and you're going to play with toys, and so on and so on. And I think in social networks, gender, like the offline gender violence also applies online. We've said it a lot, the online and the offline are not disconnected. It's one same thing, and it should be treated as that. So because of these gender stereotypes, what can we talk about in social networks as women? Okay, we can talk about babies. We can talk about fashion. We can talk about cooking, right? What else is supposed, like what a woman should be talking about? I don't know, like, oh yeah, marriage, right? But if women talk about politics or sports or video games, which are considered topics designed for men or only ascribed to men or ascribable to men because of gender roles, then they will be attacked. So for me, it's just gender 101, and it's very dangerous because what we're having is it's silencing effect as well. If I am a woman talking about politics, or if I am a woman talking about video games or sports or all the things that I'm not supposed to talk about, I will just get violence because I'm stepping out of this gender role. So what I think to solve this, we really have to solve society. I'm not pro-techno-solutionism. Oh, let's make an app to combat gender violence. No, that's not going to work. Oh, blockchain, no way, that's not going to solve anything either, right? So I think we have to combat the problem by the root, by questioning these colors, roles, topics of conversation, clothing that is deemed appropriate for penises and vaginas. I think the main problem is there, and that has been the topic of the feminist fight over the past century as well. Thanks for the question.
One more? Yes. Two. Okay, no, just pass it on. Oh. Why don't you pass them?
Hi. So in Europe, next year GDPR will get enforced as a law. So that's some good way of progressing in some better direction about the privacy and consent. Are you aware of that? Is that something that's happening in Latin America? Sorry, GDPR. So next year the GDPR law will be enforced.
Can you tell us a little bit about what GDPR is, just for people that are not?
It's basically a set of rules that will put some clarity on consent, on what's your data and what's your public data used by other companies, and you will have more control of your personal digital life. Delete yourself.
That's a very interesting question. Thanks again. All good questions. Great. I am not 100% thoroughly familiar on the entire GDPR. We do not have the same debate in Latin America, but we do tend to copy what Europe does, so it's coming our way eventually. And what I think it actually makes, GDPR makes better, is that it clarifies the right to be forgotten. Because it was in this resolution by the European Court, but it was very broad. Right? What does inaccurate mean? What does outdated mean? Right? It was a very specific case, but it has been applied because now Google, that's another part. Now Google is making those decisions by themselves without adequate standards of transparency. So you basically fill up a formula and you ask Google to delist you or forget you, but it's not forgetting, as I said. And Google just does it because they have a committee of experts that are weighing in those super complicated decisions. So just to say, I'm not pro that either at all. And I do think the GDPR is going to clarify this a little bit more. This shouldn't be Google's obligation Or should it? Are we talking about meta states, entities that are more powerful than states, thus should be making these decisions? One friend of mine actually says, well, if Google is making money out of our privacy, then they should be paying the costs for deciding these type of issues. But what I'm worried about is the private nature of these decisions, because they do not do it transparently. At least with a judge, if he messes up, you can appeal. It's public, it's out there, you can go read it. I don't know if Google actually writes a decision for every single delisting case they have. So I do hope that GDPR will make it better in this sense, and also start connecting with other discussions like intermediary responsibility. And shifting, I tend to shift away from the libertarian debate of let's not regulate Silicon Valley, leave them unregulated, which is of course what they want. No, regulate them, question their algorithms, go against them, but in which way? And I think that is the question. Thank you very much.
So the last question.
Yeah, how do you think about the difference between retrospectively withdrawing consent and pure regret? So in the example of the stickman says yes to tea, has tea, and a few hours later, a day later, says maybe that wasn't consent, I regret it. Withdraw it, it's gone, no consent afterwards. Perhaps in your own example, you implicitly allowed when you went into the public sphere to have your pictures taken and you knew they were going to be put somewhere online, at least for a day or two, perhaps not forever. So yeah, then you retrospectively withdrew your consent, which is a bit of what you were talking about. It's also regret. Well, how do you think about the difference between the concepts and the correlation?
That's a very interesting question. Wow, we have a great audience over here. Thank you. I don't regret it. I wouldn't have regretted it if it weren't because it's now online forever. Was that well conjugated? That was a hard one in English. Well, if it's not, you understood it, what I mean. I mean, I do not take it back. I do not wish I hadn't done it. I just don't want the effects of the eternal memory impeding me from making decisions about my body now. And then, of course, the social backlash that has. But in retrospective, I don't regret it. It's brought me great things, personal, political. It has to do with how I manage my body, how I perceive myself, how I learned how to protest. I learned how to be a feminist with Femin. I delved into gender theory. I don't regret it at all. But I just don't want to be chastised. So that's the first part of the answer. And I think the second one is, this is very limited to naked bodies, female naked bodies, online, in search engines. I don't think, again, this can be applied to everything because you open a really broad door. But let's think about another thing, for example. Let's say you're an HIV activist and you blog and you say really loudly you're an anti-stigmatization of HIV in Mexico, right? And then 10 years later, you just want that to be a part of your private life again. Could you? Would you? Should we be moving towards a more uniform theory of consent? For example, does clicking Facebook's contractual box means that I'm going to sell my soul to the devil throughout all the years that I'm going to use the platform? So I think it's very complicated questions. This is just an hour of my most recent reflections that started with myself and ended in a research. But it's definitely not clear-cut and it's definitely not answered. I just think we should start asking and raising these questions. And also regarding especially our digital selves. I don't know if I kind of answered. I hope I did.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Gisela.
Thank you.